I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily Week in Review. More than 20,000 Canadian lives have now been lost to COVID-19 since the beginning of the pandemic. Officials note that Quebec and Ontario together account for about 80% of the country's fatalities. Meanwhile, Ottawa is now reviewing a new COVID-19 vaccine. The Maryland, U.S.-based Novavax has applied for regulatory approval, and studies have suggested it is effective against the British and South African variants of the virus. Meanwhile, Health Canada says it is expediting the review of all COVID-19 vaccines. Novavax has quietly submitted its COVID-19 vaccine to Health Canada for regulatory approval. It comes less than 2 weeks after Ottawa finalized the deal with the Maryland-based drug maker for 52 million doses. The rolling review allows for much faster approval once the final results from the clinical trials are complete. 4 of Canada's major airlines have suspended service to Mexico and the Caribbean.
We are asking all Canadians not to travel to all parts of the world for vacation. I know it's a massive sacrifice. I know some people were hoping to connect with their families who are abroad. Look, we just also called on Canadians during Christmas and previous holidays to even the ones who live at home not to visit their family members. So we are asking all Canadians to cancel their trips abroad, regardless of the destination, or if it was visiting family or vacation.
As of this Thursday, all international passenger flights must land at one of 4 airports in Vancouver, Toronto, Calgary, or Montreal. And in the coming weeks, all air travelers arriving in Canada will have to stay at a government-approved hotel for 3 nights and take a COVID-19 test, all at their own expense. A consortium of Canadian businesses are joining forces to help get COVID-19 rapid tests up and running and people back to work. 12 companies, including Air Canada, Bank of Nova Scotia, and Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, are experimenting with antigen tests as part of a program being run by the University of Toronto's Creative Destruction Lab. Employees will be asked to go through COVID testing twice a week to detect whether they have been infected. A leading Canadian health expert calls the COVID-19 pandemic a wake-up call for Canada to create its own domestic vaccine manufacturing capacity. Dr. Alan Bernstein says with new variants emerging, Canadians may need multiple vaccines for several years to come. He also says if Pfizer and Moderna make good on delivering their combined promise of 6 million doses by the end of March, it will put immense pressure on the federal government and the provinces to finish carrying out timely vaccinations of as many as 3 million people in the next 8 weeks. A Toronto doctor is co-leading a study on so-called COVID-19 long haulers, patients who remain ill for months after being infected with the coronavirus. Dr. Angela Chung says the study will include whether genetics play a role in explaining why some people in the same family don't recover easily from the virus. Doctors have reported debilitating symptoms in some people that linger for months, ranging from difficulty breathing to brain fog. An Ontario judge says he is still wrestling with the issue of whether to order a woman and her 3 children to honor a family custody agreement by returning to Ontario. The mother of the 3 teenage boys is seeking permission for them to remain in Newfoundland and Labrador to protect the kids from the mental health tolls of the COVID-19 pandemic. Ontario Superior Court Justice Alex Pazaratz says the issue is not limited to one family and says everyone needs to pay a bit more attention to how children are coping emotionally with COVID fatigue. Well, starting Sunday, the federal government is temporarily waiving a 1-week waiting period for employment insurance benefits, which Employment Minister Carla Qualtrough says should ease financial stress by providing income support sooner. The move will allow applicants to start their claims and receive benefits immediately. The rules are set to be in place until September 25th. The federal government says it is referring the impact assessment of a Suncor Energy oil sands mine extension in northern Alberta to an independent review panel. Environment Minister Jonathan Wilkinson says the review is in the public interest, given the extent to which the open pit project could adversely affect areas of federal jurisdiction. The Alberta government is urging Ottawa to complete its assessment in a timely fashion to avoid delays that drive away investment. Hudson's Bay Company is permanently laying off more than 600 workers across Canada amid ongoing store closures due to COVID-19 lockdowns. Spokeswoman Tiffany Bauer says the layoffs represent less than 5% of the company's total workforce. Employment lawyer Lior Samfiru says his firm has been contacted by about 40 HBC workers concerned about the terms of their termination, including insufficient severance. All right, don't go away. This past week on the Forum Daily, we shared that the federal government is facing an imminent lawsuit from the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms for their newly implemented mandatory travel laws for Canadians. We spoke with the organization's litigation lawyer, Jay Cameron, about the lawsuit and new restrictions. More coming up. The Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms is preparing a legal action against the Trudeau government over their handling of traveling Canadians entering the country. This follows the government's declaration that Canadian residents coming from abroad will be forced into mandatory quarantine at their own expense, regardless of a negative COVID-19 status. According to the organization, these measures are a violation of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. In a letter sent to Transport Minister Omar Alghabra, the Justice Center claims that this process is unlawful and demands the immediate release of any Canadians currently being confined. Well, to talk more on this legal action, we are joined by Mr. Jay Cameron, Litigation Director at the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. Sir, welcome to the show.
Nima, thanks for having me.
Now, Mr. Cameron, can you tell our viewers what specific components of the federal government's program is in violation of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms for Canadians who are traveling and entering this country?
It's important to remember that the people who are arriving at these airports are people who have already been extensively screened at the airport, and they are in possession of a negative PCR test. And so they haven't done anything wrong. It's legal to enter and to leave the country at will as a Canadian. And that's pursuant to Section 6 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And they also have Section 7 rights, liberty and security of the person, a right not to be arbitrarily detained or imprisoned. That's Section 9 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. They have a right to retain counsel. This process where they're being detained at the airport, they're being put into unmarked vans and taken to these isolation facilities. There's no lawyer involved. There's no judge involved. There are no checks and balances, no whatsoever. And there's no oversight to prevent abuse by what we consider to be an increasingly antagonistic and aggressive government. And there's also no limit that we can see on how long people can potentially be detained for. And lastly, Section 12 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms says that people have a right not to be subjected to cruel and unusual punishment. These people are being taken. Their families aren't being told where they are. They're scared, and they are entering an unknown world without the normal safeguards provided by our Constitution and the rule of law.
And is there a better way that maybe the federal government could have handled this in terms of quarantining Canadians that are returning from abroad?
Right. So people were already isolating during COVID, and they're coming into the country. And now there's a requirement that they have a negative PCR test. So people are doing that. They're jumping through that hoop. And now they're arriving in Canada and they're being told that that's not good enough. So there's no apparent reason why these people can't isolate in their homes.
Now, going back to the release sent to us, the Justice Center mentioned that there are already some Canadians that have been taken to these quarantine facilities. So do we know about how many Canadians have been confined in a quarantine facility as of today?
We've officially heard of 3 so far. And like I said, they're being taken under armed guard to an unknown location. But we understand that this is going to become much more commonplace come this Thursday, this week. And so right now it's sort of in the test phase, if you want to call what's going on happening. But apparently it's going to ramp up for real on Thursday. So right now there's 3. Come Thursday there could be 300.
Now, as mentioned, the Justice Center sent a letter to Minister Alghabra, and you mentioned in this letter that the Justice Center is trying to prevent Canada from becoming a repressive replica of other countries. Can you explain this further, Mr. Cameron? We've got about a minute and a half left.
When was the last time you heard anything about the people's representatives having anything to do with any of this? When was the last time you heard Parliament or the legislature considering and debating what is being imposed on Canadians? The answer is they're not involved. Who's involved is cabinet, the Prime Minister's cabinet, individual ministers, and public health officials. And so, the Prime Minister had said before that he admires China's basic dictatorship, and it's very concerning to see the hallmarks of that kind of regime being imposed in Canada.
All right, sir, about 30 seconds left, but what are the next steps for the Justice Centre in regards to this legal action?
So we've been contacted by many people, people on both sides of the border. There's all these snowbirds who are attempting to come back or delaying their trips to come back, hoping that this is going to be done away with by May. And so the next stop is to file the pleadings in court and to have the court receive our request to act as a check and balance on what's going on.
All right, more news coming up on the Forum Daily Week in Review. This week, we reported on concerns over new variants of COVID-19 popping up across the country. More on this when we get back. Health Canada could approve AstraZeneca's COVID-19 vaccine within weeks. If it does, the country could receive up to 1.1 million additional doses of it by the end of March through a global vaccine sharing initiative. Procurement Minister Anita Anand says up to 3.2 million total doses could arrive by the end of June. She says that would be a boost to the current 6 million doses expected from Pfizer and Moderna before the end of next month. COVID-19 variants are taking root across Canada. Dr. Teresa Tam says at least 148 cases of the variants have been seen across the country. Yesterday, New Brunswick health officials confirmed 3 cases.
New strains of the virus have appeared, which spread faster and more readily than the original version. And I mentioned that these variants are present in Canada and that they would soon arrive in New Brunswick. Well, that day has arrived, and we can confirm now that there is the UK variant of COVID-19 in our province.
Dr. Tam says Canada needs to ramp up testing for variants through the labor-intensive process of whole genome sequencing. Right now, health officials only sequence between 5 and 10% of positive COVID-19 samples across the country. The state of emergency in BC has been extended again as COVID-19 continues to be a threat, especially the growth of new, more contagious strains. Health officials say the province is headed in the right direction, which will help them better deal with the new variants from the UK and South Africa. Still, Public Safety Minister Mike Farnworth says some people still refuse to follow safety rules, noting that since August, more than 800 violations have been issued. Physicians in Manitoba are calling on the government to issue COVID-19 vaccination cards for people who need a record from their doctor so that they can board a plane once travel is permitted again. The province hasn't yet decided whether it would provide a card or an online record. The physicians group, Doctors Manitoba, says it would make sense to provide some sort of record at the point of immunization so that people don't need to request the documents later. Fishing and farming associations on Canada's east coast are growing concerned that Ottawa's new travel rules could harm their operations. The National Farmers Union in New Brunswick says the change, which suspends commercial flights from Mexico and the Caribbean, could delay the arrival of much-needed temporary foreign workers to the region. Meanwhile, the head of Nova Scotia's Seafood Alliance says it is not known whether quarantine plans need to be modified if the workers are allowed to come. Canadian National Railway set a new record last month by shipping over 2.95 million metric tons of Canadian grain and processed grain products. It says it is also breaking records with over 600,000 metric tons of grain from moving direct from Western Canada via container, in addition to volumes shipped from Eastern Canada. CN says with harsher weather always just around the corner, it is critical to keep up the pace. Advocates say homeless people and shelter workers should have priority access to COVID-19 vaccines. 2 national groups that advocate for vulnerable populations make the plea in a newly released position statement. Dr. Monty Ghosh co-chairs the Canadian Network for the Health and Housing of People Experiencing Homelessness, and he says chronic health conditions are more prevalent among the homeless population. And because of that, they usually fare much worse when dealing with COVID than the rest of the population. A pair of doctors have offered senators opposing descriptions of what it's like to receive medical assistance in dying in Canada. One said it was a beautiful, peaceful death, the other a painful end comparable to drowning. The testimony was being presented as the Senate's Legal and Constitutional Affairs Committee reviews legislation meant to expand access to Canada's 5-year-old regime for medical assistance in dying, known as MAID. Canada's pricey push to upgrade and update its Navy is continuing to face challenges, and a retired Vice Admiral thinks it may be time to rethink the plan. Earlier this week, the Department of National Defence revealed construction on the first of 15 new warships was delayed. Mark Norman says there is a direct correlation between delays and cost increases when it comes to military procurement projects. Mr. Norman says if it comes down to significant cuts to the new warship's capabilities or building fewer vessels, quality should trump quantity. The city of Wuhan, China, the hip-hop group Wu-Tang Clan. Usually there is little chance that you would mistake one for the other. However, the Beijing government has made a formal complaint over T-shirts ordered by a Canadian embassy staffer in China. Officials claim that the shirts had an image of a bat and that the shirts suggested that the new coronavirus originated in bats and spread in Wuhan. Turns out the bat image was just the W that serves as the logo for the Wu-Tang Clan. Canadian officials say the Ottawa government has apologized for any misunderstanding. Don't go away. International news from this past week after the break, starting with a story from the U.S., where Democrats were working to strip a Georgia Republican of her duties. Meanwhile, the Red Cross announced a plan to support COVID-19 immunizations for 500 million people around the world. More on these stories and from around the world when we return. Stay with us. House Republicans will be forced to go on the record defending or challenging Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. The Georgia Republican has drawn anger from both sides of the aisle for her past endorsements of far-fetched conspiracy theories and violent rhetoric. Democrats issued an ultimatum earlier the week, telling House Republicans to strip Ms. Greene of her committee assignments, or they would. But House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy ruled out taking action and instead accused Democrats of a partisan power grab. An international Red Cross organization will help support the immunization of 500 million people worldwide against COVID-19, amid concerns about vast inequalities between rich and poor countries. The Federation warned such inequality could potentially backfire to deadly and devastating effects, because areas of the globe that remain unvaccinated could allow the virus to spread and mutate. Thousands of variants have already been documented. The plan involves the rollout of national vaccination campaigns and steps to build trust in vaccine programs. Lebanon's investigation into last August's devastating Beirut port blast has ground to a halt. The country's ruling political groups in power for decades have enormous influence over the courts and are accused of preventing any accountability. Political leaders have been publicly critical of the investigating judge. Dozens of victims' family members gathered at the judge's home this week, urging him to resume the probe, but many fear that he has caved to pressure. Allies of Myanmar's deposed leader Aung San Suu Kyi say she has been charged with a crime. The move gives the new military government grounds to continue her detention as it announces plans to investigate the recent election that her party won by a landslide. Despite calls for nonviolent resistance to the coup, residents from Yangon honked horns and made loud noises after nightfall, and medical workers have declared that they won't work for the new military government. A former commander with the notorious Ugandan rebel group, the Lord's Resistance Army, has been convicted of dozens of war crimes and crimes against humanity. The International Criminal Court says Dominic Ongwen will be sentenced for a later date. Mr. Ongwen was abducted by the militia as a 9-year-old boy and transformed into a child soldier and later promoted to a senior leadership rank. He now faces a maximum punishment of life imprisonment. A legal showdown is looming in South Africa, where former President Jacob Zuma is refusing to obey court orders to testify at a judicial inquiry into corruption charges against him. Mr. Zuma has been warned that he is not above the law after he publicly stated that he intends to defy a court order to appear at the inquiry. It is a test of whether President Ramaphosa will be able to take decisive action against corruption. The Deputy Chief Justice said further action will be taken against Mr. Zuma if he fails to honor a scheduled appearance this month. Turkey has rejected international criticism of its crackdown on protests by students who are opposing the appointment of a government loyalist to head Istanbul's top university. The Turkish Foreign Ministry on Thursday warned countries to stay out of its domestic issues. Students and faculty members of Boğaziçi University have been protesting President Erdogan's appointment as rector of an academic who once ran for parliament as a candidate for the ruling party and have been calling for his resignation. Taiwan has established a trade office in the South American country of Guyana, a diplomatic win for the island, which has continued to lose allies in an aggressive poaching campaign from China in recent years. China's foreign ministry responded, demanding that those concerned avoid setting up any official institutions with each other and take practical measures to correct mistakes. Taiwan has been the subject of a massive pressure campaign from China that claims the island as part of its territory to be conquered by military force if necessary. The space company founded by Elon Musk is moving ahead with its launch program following Tuesday's explosive landing of its Mars rocket prototype. After multiple weather delays and a technical issue, the company had back-to-back launches planned for this morning. The first launch was set for Cape Canaveral in Florida, the second at the neighboring Kennedy Space Center. Both Falcon 9 rockets will carry more SpaceX Starlink satellites into orbit. People up and down the UK took to their doorsteps this week to honor Captain Sir Tom Moore with a national clap. The 100-year-old veteran died after testing positive for COVID-19. He walked into the hearts of the nation during the first coronavirus lockdown last April when he shuffled up and down his garden with his walker to raise an astonishing $40 million for healthcare workers. He was later knighted by the Queen. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at top national and international news stories from this past week. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and make sure to check out our social media handles. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for updates. We are also available on YouTube. All right, well, stay tuned for our other programs on our network, and make sure to check out our commentary shows on economics, politics, Canadian law, and social issues that affect Canadians from all over the country. All right, thank you for joining us. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you again next week on the Forum Daily. Take care.